March 29, 1993, two boys vanished from the dry channel of the Otay River in Imperial Beach. I still remember the call crackling through my radio. Two blue Schwinn bicycles abandoned near the riverbank. Possible missing juveniles. By the time I slipped on my gloves and stepped beneath the gray morning sky, search teams were fanning out along the dusty channel, and helicopters droned overhead. I'm Detective Michael Reyes. That morning, I'd been up before dawn, chasing routine paperwork and nursing a coffee that went cold in my hand. But nothing about this case would be routine. Deputies pointed me to the spot, two battered bikes lying side by side in a tangle of brush. Tires were bent, frames scratched, like someone discarded them in a hurry. One bike still carried a dangling red reflector. The other's grips were worn smooth from hours of use. No bloodstains. No obvious signs of a struggle. Just two empty seats and a silence that felt wrong. I crouched beside the wheel tracks leading away from the bikes. Shallow depressions in the sand, adult-sized and smaller, side by side. The footprints disappeared into the scattering of boulders at the water's edge. I scanned the bank, heart tightening. The water was low, trickling in thin rivulets over moon-gray stones, and the mud along the shore was fresh. I could almost imagine tiny hands pressing into it, the last trace of life before the boys were gone. Forensics arrived minutes later, tagging the scene and dusting for prints. I stepped back and surveyed the horizon. Palm trees swayed against an overcast sky, the scent of salt drifting from the bay. Tourists wouldn't arrive for hours, so this place belonged to us now. The hunters, the dogs, the men and women determined to bring two children home. I radioed dispatch to widen the search perimeter and called for bloodhounds. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I'd been on the force 6 years, but cases like this, children disappearing without a trace, still cut me to the bone. Each second that passed deepened the unknown. Were Jonathan Sellers, age 9, and 13-year-old Charlie Kiver together? Afraid? Injured? And who had taken them? As I stood, I noticed something clutched in the mud beside the bikes. A fragment of torn fabric, blue cotton, like a t-shirt. I bagged it carefully, then trailed my flashlight beam along the brush line. There, wedged between two rocks, was a single footprint that didn't match the others, a narrow print, toes splayed wide, as if the person had paused, balanced on one foot. That print sent a shiver up my spine. It was the first real clue. Later that day, I paid a visit to the families. Jonathan's mother sat on her porch, face pale, rocking back and forth in a faded lawn chair. Charlie's aunt gripped a framed photo of the boys smiling in matching t-shirts. I gave my standard assurance. We will find them, but inside I wondered, who would do this? And why here, along a riverbed so familiar to every kid in town? As dusk settled, searchlights swept the channel once more. I lingered at the edge of the water, staring at the ripples dancing around those footprints. Something about the shape nagged at me, familiar yet unsettling. I tucked my notebook into my coat and whispered a promise to the empty air. I will discover what happened on this riverbank. I didn't yet know the face behind those prints, but I vowed to follow them wherever they led, even if they circled back to someone I once thought I knew. Before dawn on March 31st, our search party stretched farther up and down the Otay River channel. I'd crawled through brambles and waded ankle-deep in mud, flashlight beam cutting swaths through the thick undergrowth. That morning, a volunteer hiker called in a sighting. Bodies, off the trail, under that leaning willow. I sprinted across the rocky bank, heart hammering, and found them exactly where he'd said. Two figures, partially clothed and eerily still, one slung over a low branch, the other collapsed beneath. Charlie's longer frame hung limp from the willow limb, denim jacket riding up to reveal a reddened torso. Jonathan lay face down in the mud, arms splayed, a single shoe missing. Both sets of eyes stared blankly at the pale sky. Pain and fury collided inside me. I dropped to my knees, careful not to step on evidence, and pulled on latex gloves. I righted Jonathan's head to check for breathing. Nothing. Then Charlie's. Nothing there either. Around them, the mud had been trampled into a chaotic swirl of footprints, tire impressions, and broken twigs. Somewhere in that mess lay the truth. The coroner's team arrived within the hour, their strobes blinking like distant warning lights. I watched as they draped chalk outlines around the bodies and bagged samples of soil, hair, and fibers. I knelt beside the willow and noticed tiny scratch marks on the branch, at roughly Jonathan's height, parallel gouges that looked like fingernails digging into wood. The scene felt staged, ritualized, as if someone wanted us to find them here, exposed and helpless. The initial autopsy confirmed my worst suspicions. Both boys had died by ligature strangulation. A makeshift tourniquet of braided cord, something tight enough to throttle but not break bone. And the pathologist's face turned grim when he mentioned the worst part, evidence of sexualized assault on both victims. I closed my eyes against the morning light, hating the world for what had been done. Investigators canvassed local campsites and questioned transient workers along the channel, but no one had seen or heard anything, just those abandoned bikes. A battered watch found near Charlie's body bore no identifiable markings. Jonathan's red shirt was torn in places, as though he'd tried to fight back. Yet no blood trails, no eyewitnesses. By midday, searches shifted into a cold case protocol. Photos, sketches, lab tests, and waiting. I returned to headquarters late that night, hands caked with mud, uniforms stained with leaves and blood. On my desk lay the boys' flyers, smiling faces eclipsed by despair. I taped them to the bulletin board and circled their names in red ink. Jonathan Sellers, Charlie Kiver. I sat back, exhausted, and realized that whoever had done this had planned meticulously, struck swiftly, and vanished before we even arrived. The mission went from rescue to recovery to reckoning. And yet every clue we uncovered only tangled the mystery tighter. As I turned off the lights in the evidence room, I whispered into the darkness, "I won't let you go, boys." But I had no idea how far I'd have to follow those footprints, and how many years it would take before the truth finally caught up with us. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, yet the Otay River channel remained silent. Back at headquarters, I watched as the case file grew fat with evidence. Bikes, fabric swatches, twig fragments, and the boys' blood-soaked clothes. Forensics ran every test they could imagine: fiber matching, soil analysis, isotope testing on tire rubber. We interviewed dozens of suspects, local drifters, transient construction crews, even a displaced veteran with a history of violence. Every lead fizzled out, leaving us with nothing but questions. I remember the night I sat alone in the lab, surrounded by microscopes and glass slides, tracing the same stretch of braided cord that squeezed the boys' throats. I lifted a single strand, handed it to the tech under a magnifying lamp, and asked the same desperate question: "Who made this?" She shook her head. "We don't know, detective." The channel became a cautionary tale in our department, the case we couldn't crack. Whenever a new detective joined our team, we'd hand over Jonathan and Charlie's file like a rite of passage. I'd feel their eyes on me, silently asking why I hadn't solved it. I'd force a smile, tuck the file under my arm, and tell them, "Keep digging. One day, someone will slip up." Years passed. I got promoted to lead cold cases and watched as technology leaped forward. We added the boys' DNA swabs to national databases, hoping for a match. Every month, an automated alert would ping. No hits found. Every month, my chest would tighten a little more. On a crisp morning in late 2003, 10 years after their bikes were abandoned, I was poring over a stack of case updates when my phone buzzed. It was Forensics Director Linda Cho, her voice calm but tight. "Mike, you need to get down here." In her sterile lab, she pointed to a computer screen showing two simple words in blinking red: DNA match. My head swam. The match was to a man named Scott Erskine, born 1962, convicted in Florida for sexual assault on an inmate, then transferred to San Diego County in '97. The same Scott Erskine I grew up with, my childhood neighbor. The kid who raced me down the riverbank and shoved me when I outran him. I stared at the screen, vision blurring. "You're sure?" I asked. Cho nodded. "We've confirmed it twice." His sample was entered when he was fingerprinted on that '97 felony. The world tilted. I felt lightheaded, then enraged. I stormed into the evidence vault and pulled Jonathan's torn T-shirt and Charlie's bloodstained jacket. I tried to steady my hands as I placed them under the microscope, picturing Scott's DNA, the same twisted code that had strangled those boys. Within hours, Erskine was under surveillance. I drove out to the Otay River channel at dusk, helmet off, hands on the steering wheel, replaying every moment we'd shared as kids: baseball practice, trick-or-treating, lying in his backyard and planning our futures. Had I missed the signs? The petty thefts, the animal cruelty rumors, the way he'd glare at families at the playground? That night, I couldn't sleep. I wrote a list on a notepad. 1. Arrest Erskine. 2. Secure warrants. 3. Prepare for trial. Each item felt surreal. A boy I had known as a neighbor was now the central figure in my department's most notorious cold case. By sunrise, deputies swarmed the modest duplex where Erskine lived. I stood in the hallway, badge clipped to my belt, and watched as they cuffed him without resistance. His eyes flicked past me, no recognition, no fear, just a cold detachment I'd seen only once before in a corpse's stare. As they led him away, I felt a grim relief wash over me. 10 years of dead ends, a decade of haunted dreams, all converging on this moment. Yet even as the weight lifted, I knew the hardest work lay ahead, piecing together a trial that could bring justice for 2 boys stolen from their futures. And somewhere, in a room not far from here, Scott Erskine sat quietly in a holding cell, his DNA etched in the blood of 2 children, his fate finally tethered to the truth we'd pursued for a lifetime. The courtroom was silent the morning Scott Erskine finally faced the families of Jonathan and Charlie. I sat in the front row watching as the prosecution laid out decades of proof. They showed photos of the abandoned bikes, maps of the Otay Channel, and the brazen DNA match that broke the case wide open. Each exhibit felt like a hammer strike, forging the chain that bound Erskine to 2 stolen lives. When it came time for my testimony, I rose, heart pounding beneath my badge and uniform. I described the riverbed footprints, the twisted tourniquet cord, and the slit willow branch where Charlie's body had hung. I spoke of the autopsy findings, ligature strangulation, and the cruelty that had no excuse. I watched Erskine's face, impassive, almost bored, as though my words were echoes in an empty room. Family members took the stand next. Jonathan's mother trembled as she recounted her son's laugh and the red reflector dangling from his bike. Charlie's aunt closed her eyes, struggling to breathe, before reading a letter her nephew had written about wanting to join the Boy Scouts. Their grief filled the room like smoke. Every sob and whispered, "Why?" drove home the cost of Erskine's evil. Over 5 days, the jury reviewed every scrap of evidence. I observed from the gallery as defense attorneys argued, claiming Erskine's past convictions didn't prove guilt for these murders. But the braided cord, the clothing fibers, and, above all, the DNA link left no room for doubt. When the foreperson spoke the words, "We find the defendant guilty," a collective exhale swept the courtroom. Justice, at least as justice can be, had been served. Sentencing in California followed swiftly. The judge handed down the death penalty, his gavel slamming like thunder across the aisle. Weeks later, Florida added life without parole for Erskine's earlier assaults. As deputies escorted him from the dock, his gaze met mine for a fleeting second, cold, inscrutable, devoid of regret. I felt a weight lift, but also an emptiness. The moment of closure was nothing like I'd imagined. I left the courthouse into a bright afternoon sun. For the families, the verdict spelled an end to decades of uncertainty. For me, it marked the start of healing, inch by inch. Yet I carried a hollow knot in my chest, knowing that the boy who once kicked dirt at my feet had become a phantom etched into every step I take along that river channel. The trial was over, but the echoes of that dark spring would follow us all, reminding me that some wounds never fully close. Years passed after the verdict, and I tried to leave this case behind. I transferred to the cold cases unit, working on files that felt as weightless as smoke. But every time I drove past the Otay River channel, my chest tightened, and I'd catch myself gripping the steering wheel like it was a lifeline. In early 2020, I sat at my desk scrolling through internal memos when an alert popped up. Inmate death San Quentin, Scott Erskine. My heart sank. He had contracted COVID-19 in the overcrowded prison wings and succumbed to the disease on July 3rd. I stared at the screen, struck by the finality of 3 simple words. Cause of death, COVID-19. I remember leaving the office and heading straight to the channel at dusk. The sky was a bruised purple, and the tide was low, exposing slippery stones along the bank. I carried no rifle that evening, only a single flashlight and the weight of 27 years' worth of memories. I knelt where those 2 little blue bikes had once lain and laid a folded photo of Jonathan and Charlie on a flat rock. Their faces, bright smiles frozen in time, looked back at me in the flashlight's glow. I whispered their names. Jonathan. Charlie. My voice cracked. He's gone too. It felt inadequate. No ritual, no grand gesture could honor their lives or erase the horror. But I owed them this moment of remembrance, this silent promise that they would not be forgotten. As I stood, a cool breeze stirred the branches overhead, and I thought I heard the faint echo of laughter 2 small voices carried on the wind. It was impossible, of course, but I allowed myself to believe it for a heartbeat. Walking back to my car, I realized the case had defined more than just my career. It had shaped the man I became. I learned that evil can wear a familiar face, that justice may arrive decades too late, and that some scars never fully heal. But I also saw how the persistence of truth and the unwavering resolve of those who hunt it can bring closure, however imperfect. Tonight, I leave behind this channel once more, stepping into the fading light. I carry with me the stories of Jonathan, Charlie, and yes, even Scott. Because in the end, every disappearance and every discovery binds us together in the fragile pursuit of justice. Detective Michael Reyes.